Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're looking into offsite backups for Proxmox Backup Server. If you're running a Proxmox home lab, this is something you're probably already thinking about. It's really that next step, to make sure that your backups are really secure. So, like, imagine you've got your PBS set up maybe alongside something like a TrueNAS server. Everything's working great, you're backing up your VMs. But what happens if something happens at your house? What if there's a fire or a flood?
That's really where that offsite backup becomes critical. It's that extra layer of protection that can
Yeah.
really save the day.
Right, exactly. And that's what we're going to be diving into today. We're going to be exploring all the different strategies for setting up offsite backups for your Proxmox backup server. And to help us break it all down, we've got our expert here.
Yeah, and the really interesting thing about offsite backups for Proxmox is that there isn't like a one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah.
It really depends on your individual needs and what your priorities are. Some people might prioritize simplicity. Others might be more focused on cost or having that fine-grained control over the whole process.
Yeah, so it really depends on what you're comfortable with and what your budget is like. So let's jump right in. If you're already using TrueNAS, you might be thinking about using TrueNAS Cloud Sync. It seems like a natural fit, right?
It does, and it can be a really convenient option.
Yeah, because it can automatically sync your PBS data to a cloud provider like Backblaze, so you're not having to manually copy files or anything like that. And the best part is it can respect your PBS retention policies.
That's right. So it'll keep your offsite backups in sync with your onsite backups, which can save you a lot of storage space in the long run.
Yeah, it makes things so much simpler. But there is one thing to keep in mind. Some users have mentioned that TrueNAS Cloud Sync might try to sync your entire TrueNAS data store,
Yeah, that's a good point. It can be a bit overkill if you don't need to back up everything.
especially if you have a large data store. But the good news is that you can actually customize what gets synced.
Right. You can specify the source directory, so you only back up the data that you really need.
Okay, so it's not a complete free-for-all. You still have some control over it.
Exactly.
And I know there was a user in the source material that we looked at who was able to successfully sync only their chosen data store, and they were still able to follow their PBS retention policies.
Which is great. It shows that you can really tailor the process to your own specific needs.
So that's TrueNAS Cloud Sync. But if you're looking for something that's a little bit more managed, there are also dedicated offsite PBS providers.
Yeah, like Tuxie's PBS.
Right, Texas PBS.
It's a service that essentially acts as a backup for your backup.
Okay, so you're syncing your main PBS to their platform.
Right.
And the cool thing about Tuxies is that they offer a free tier up to 150 gigabytes.
Yeah, that's pretty generous,
Eh.
especially if you have a smaller setup.
It's a great way to get started with offsite backups without having to shell out a ton of money.
And it's super easy to use. One user in the source material said that they use Cloud PBs as a hosted PBS, and it works flawlessly.
That's awesome. When you hear something like that, it really gives you confidence.
It does.
But of course, as your backup needs grow, you'll want to keep in mind the potential cost of upgrading to a paid plan.
Yeah, that's definitely something to factor in.
Okay, so we've got TrueNAS Cloud Sync. We've got hosted PBS providers like Tuxis PBS. But let's say you're the type of person who likes to have more control over things.
The more hands-on type.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, in that case, you might want to consider using Rsync. Now, Rsync is a command line tool, but it gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of what you back up, when you back it up, and where it goes.
Yeah, that's very powerful.
But with great power comes great responsibility.
Right, that's right.
Because you're going to be responsible for setting up the automation yourself, whether that's manually or by writing scripts.
Yeah, and one thing that's really important to remember with Rsync is that you need to verify your backups.
Yeah, we saw a user in the source material who assumed that Rsync would handle the verification automatically, but it doesn't.
That's right. You actually need to incorporate checksum comparisons into your Rsync script.
Okay, so it's not just a set it and forget it kind of thing.
Not with Rsync. You need to be a little bit more proactive.
So if you're comfortable with the command line and you don't mind doing a little bit of scripting, Rsync can be a great option. But if you're looking for something that's a little bit more user-friendly, you might want to consider one of the other options.
Right. It's all about finding the right tool for the job.
And so far, we've been talking about options that are either cloud-based or involve syncing to a remote server. But what if you have a massive amount of data that you need to back up?
Well, in that case, you might want to consider using a cloud-based storage solution like Amazon Glacier or Backblaze.
Now, these are designed for long-term storage, and they're very cost-effective,
Yeah.
especially when you're talking about cold storage.
Right. Cold storage means that your data is archived in a way that's super cheap. but it takes a bit longer to retrieve it.
Yeah, so if you need to access your data quickly, this might not be the best option.
But if you're just looking for a place to store your backups long-term and you don't need to access them frequently, then it can be a really good choice.
So it's kind of like that box of old photos in the attic.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
know it's there if you need it, but you're not going to be digging through it every day.
Right.
So that's cold storage. But what if you want to keep your backups off-site, but you still want to keep them within your own ecosystem?
Well, in that case, you might want to consider setting up an on-premise remote backup.
This is basically where you set up a secondary PBS at a remote location.
Like maybe a friend's house or a small server tucked away somewhere.
Right. It gives you a lot of control. And it can potentially be faster to restore your data than if you were using a cloud-based solution.
But of course, you're also going to be responsible for maintaining that remote server. That's right. You'll need to take care of the hardware, networking, the software updates.
So it's a trade-off. But it's definitely an option worth considering if you're looking for that extra level of control.
Exactly.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about TrueNAS Cloud Sync, hosted PBS providers, Rsync, Amazon, Glacier Backblaze, and on-premise remote backups. And I think it's really important to emphasize that there's no right or wrong answer here.
It really depends on your individual needs and preferences.
Right. So I think it's a good time to take a step back and think about what all of this means for you and your Proxmox setup. And we'll do that right after this break.
So, after looking at all these different options, what does it all mean for you and your Proxmox setup?
Right. Like we've gone through a lot of different strategies for setting up offsite backups.
From cloud-based solutions to those more like hands-on DIY approaches.
So what's the takeaway? Is there one that's like the best?
Well, that's the thing with offsite backups. There's no magic bullet, no one-size-fits-all solution.
It really comes down to what works best for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You got to think about your specific needs. What are your priorities? What's your comfort level with the technical stuff?
So if you're all about convenience and you love automation, maybe something like TrueNAS Cloud Sync or a hosted PBS service like Tuxe's would be a good fit.
Right, those can be really easy to set up and manage.
But if you really like to tinker and you want to have more control over every little detail, then maybe Rsync or even setting up your own on-premise remote backup would be more your style.
Exactly. It's all about finding the solution that aligns with you.
In your personality.
And your specific setup, too.
Totally. But no matter which pack you choose, there's one thing that's absolutely critical.
Testing those restorations.
Yes, this is so important.
You got to make sure that your backups are actually recoverable.
Seriously. You don't want to wait until disaster strikes to find out that your backups are corrupted or that you don't know how to restore them.
It's like a fire drill for your data.
Right.
You practice so that when the real thing happens, you're prepared.
And you know what to do. And speaking of making sure everything works as it should, the source material we looked at ends with a really interesting question.
It asks, do you have anything in mind as to how to verify backups in the cloud will be intact or recoverable? Storing in a cloud drive won't cut it without getting your hands dirty.
Wow, that's a great question. It really makes you think, because we often assume that our backups are safe in the cloud.
Right.
But how do we actually know for sure?
That they're really restorable.
What can we do to verify that?
It's something that everyone should think about.
And this deep dive is really just the starting point.
We've given you some food for thought.
And hopefully some of the tools and knowledge to make informed decisions about your offsite backup strategy.
But the journey doesn't end here.
It's an ongoing process, right?
Absolutely.
Of learning and adapting and refining your approach.
As technology evolves.
And your needs change.
And that's the cool thing about the home lab community.
There are so many people out there
who are willing to share their experiences.
The good and the bad.
So we can all learn from each other.
Exactly. So if you found a really clever way to verify those cloud backups, or you've discovered some hidden gem of a tool,
don't keep it a secret.
Share it with the community. Help others on their home lab journey.
Because ultimately, we're all in this together.
We all want to build those robust, reliable systems that we can depend on.
Systems that give us the freedom to experiment, to learn, to push the boundaries.
Knowing that our data is safe and sound.
Every step of the way.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on. We've explored so many different aspects of offsite Proxmox backup server strategies today.
We've tackled some tough questions.
And hopefully inspired you to take your backup game to the next level.
Because remember, it's not just about the technology.
It's about having that peace of mind.
Knowing that your data is protected.
And with that, we'll say goodbye for today.
Keep those home labs humming
Keep those backups running.
and keep those creative juices flowing.
Until next time, and happy backing up, everyone.
You know, it is kind of funny when you think about it. Backups. They seem so technical and kind of boring, but they can actually be really empowering.
That's true. When you know your data is safe and sound, it frees you up to try new things. You're not so afraid to experiment in your home lab because you know you can always roll back if something goes wrong.
It's like having that safety net.
Right. Like a trapeze artist. They wouldn't try those crazy flips and spins without a net below them.
Exactly. And in the same way, we shouldn't be diving headfirst into these home lab projects without having a solid backup strategy in place.
It's all about finding that balance between
Okay.
taking risks and being prepared.
And that's why it's so important to choose a backup strategy that aligns with your own personal comfort level.
Yeah, some people are totally fine with the more hands-on approach, while others prefer something that's completely automated,
And both are totally valid.
as long as it works for you. And you're confident in your ability to recover your data if you need to.
I think that's the key takeaway here. There's no one right way to do backups.
It's all about finding what works best for you and your home lab.
And it's not a one-time decision either. It's a journey.
You're always learning and adapting as you go.
Right. Technology is always changing. And your needs are going to change over time, too.
So it's important to stay informed and to revisit your backup strategy periodically.
And don't be afraid to ask for help.
The home lab community is amazing.
There are so many knowledgeable people out there who are willing to share their experiences and advice.
So don't be shy. Reach out and ask questions, and share your own tips and tricks as well.
Because the more we share, the better we all become.
And that's what it's all about, right? Building a better home lab experience for everyone.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap things up.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure as always.
Until next time.
Keep those home labs humming, keep those backups running, and most importantly, keep learning and exploring. Goodbye, everyone.